All right, top 10 films of 2023, late as usual. Let's get these honorable mentions going. The Killer, Priscilla, Cobweb, When Evil Lurks, No One Will Save You, Barbie, Infinity Pool, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, and Skidamarink. Okay, number 10, The Boy and the Heron. Hayao Miyazaki's The Boy and the Heron is yet another reason why I am so glad this man refuses to retire. As his long-suffering producer Toshio Suzuki has stated, I can no longer stop him. Side note, I just thought it was funny that one of the publications present when he said this titled their article Fake Retirement. Anyway, it's a good movie. As you've probably already heard, this one is a bit more on the abstract side for Miyazaki. It follows the story of Mahito, a boy trying to navigate his new life after the tragic death of his mother. His father has not only remarried very quickly, but is remarried to his dead wife's sister who's already pregnant with Mahito's cousin sibling. Wild. Plus, World War II is going on, so Mahito is having a very hard time to say the least. His father's decision to keep things in the family, so to speak, takes Mahito on a journey into his mother's past as his mother's family estate holds the entryway to another world. There's a hauntingly somber vibe to a lot of this one. It's an exploration of birth, death, and the spaces in between, and if that sounds vague, good, because I don't want to spoil it. I do find the original Japanese title, How Do You Live, to be a far more fitting one for this story. I just don't know why they changed it, because it really encapsulates a lot of what this film is trying to convey. As usual, Studio Ghibli remains the gold standard for hand-drawn animation. This film is visually stunning. I don't even have to say it. The ongoing partnership Miyazaki has with composer Joe Hisaishi continues to be a match made in heaven. Hisaishi has written some of my all-time favorite film scores. He has such a talent for these bittersweet, deeply emotional pieces that just rip your heart out. The main theme for The Boy and the Heron, Ask Me Why, was originally a birthday gift to Miyazaki, which is both incredibly sweet and also probably a nightmare for everyone else at that birthday party who got him like a pen or something. Just another transcendent film from an old pro as he continues to prove why he's one of the greats. And I hope Peepaw never retires. Number 9, Beau is Afraid. Hey, Ari Aster Defender here. And guess what? I'm at it again. And so is he.
Can we talk about Mariah Carey?
Sure. What can I tell you?
Listen, I was really ready for Beau is Afraid to be the one that I didn't like. Not because it didn't seem like a story I would be into, but rather how just divisive Ari Aster is in general. People who don't like him really do not like him. And I've been waiting to encounter a piece of his work that would make me understand why. But whoops, I loved it. Out of his 3 features, this is for sure his not for everyone one, but man, it was for me, sorry. Joaquin Phoenix plays Beau, an anxiety-ridden middle-aged man who, while simply trying to visit his controlling mother, is thrust into the most frightening journey of his life. There are distinct elements of dark comedy in Aster's other 2 features, and in some of his short films as well, but Beau is Afraid is him completely letting loose. This is fully a dark comedy, and a very funny one at that. The great thing about finally having access to this thing at home is that I can pause and read all of the ridiculous graffiti and business names that I wasn't able to catch in the theater. Some of the funniest background gags and production design just ever. It's so good. As funny as this film is throughout, it's still quite upsetting, but still, as dark and disturbing as some of the moments in this film are, it never quite loses its comedic edge. There's a beautiful animated sequence in the middle of the film that I know is where a lot of people feel like the movie comes to a screeching halt, but buddy, I loved it. We've got some nods to Eraserhead in there, especially in the beginning, some Possession, if you know, you know. Joaquin Phoenix is just great. His performance as Beau almost feels like it's a different take on that Henry character from Eraserhead. They share that through line of being deeply damaged by sexual repression, isolation, and not feeling like they have a tremendous amount of control over their own life. But Phoenix and Aster's version of that type of person is this very visibly anxiety-ridden, very visibly wears his panic and desperation on his sleeve kind of guy. He's just such a pathetic character. You just feel so bad for him for like 3 hours. Beau is Afraid is Ari Aster at his most out there so far, and I loved it. Number 8, Talk to Me. I spoke about Talk to Me in a previous video, so I won't go on about it too much as to not risk repeating myself a whole bunch, but what a solid little horror movie. It manages to properly execute so much of what seems to slip through the fingers of other mainstream horror all too often. A very fresh take on an old convention, that monkey's paw object of temptation that you can easily understand someone being drawn to, someone just not being able to help themselves. Sometimes people fuck around because of their misguided desire to find out. Did you ever think about that? Grounded performances, teenage characters that don't seem like they were written by someone who is deeply out of touch, some of the best editing I've seen in a recent mainstream horror film, and as a frequent watcher of all things disturbing, I tend to be a little bit more desensitized than most, and there are a couple of moments in here that really got me. Every technical element of this film makes it so mind-blowing that this is Danny and Michael Philippous's first feature. Love a couple of YouTubers transcending into making an excellent film like this. Absolutely nailed it. More from them, please and thank you. Number 7 is a tie between Past Lives and The Iron Claw. A nice double feature if you feel the need to cry all day with no breaks. Past Lives was written and directed by Celine Song and is another outstanding first feature, by the way. It tells the story of two childhood friends, Nora and Hae Sung, at 3 different stages of their lives. Song has stated that she came up with the idea for the film while she was sitting between her childhood sweetheart from Korea and her husband so that she could translate for them. So this is a deeply personal story to her. It's very grounded and not really in the business of creating any wish fulfillment or being overly melodramatic like one might expect from a story about unrequited love. It's a very intimate look into what it means to have to leave someone behind and how that might include leaving part of yourself behind with them. Nora leaves South Korea as a child. It's completely out of her control. She has to change her name, start this whole new life, and as a result, her friendship and budding romance with Hae Sung is cut short. So we see these two stories about these people and how they grow and change and attempt to reconnect over the course of the next 20 plus years. All 3 of the main performances are stunning. They are all so perfectly understated. Really excellent chemistry coming across with this cast. I guess they even had the child actors do a chemistry read during auditions, and it really shows. On top of this being a beautifully crafted story, very well shot, I think a big reason why people are connecting with this film so thoroughly is that the way that they casted was not just based on acting ability. They really put a lot of emphasis on people's chemistry with one another, and it just works so well. Some of my favorite dialogue of the year, as well as these sort of non-verbal interactions that people have in it. There's one in particular that just absolutely knocked me out, and that ending was really something. Celine Song directed this with such skill and precision, and I am definitely looking forward to more from her. The Iron Claw was written and directed by Sean Durkin and reduced me to a sobbing mess throughout. It's starting to feel like we're getting a little relief from every biopic being an awful paint-by-numbers garbage can. We've been seeing some art lately. It's nice. I really almost don't know where to begin with this one. I knew nothing about the Von Erich family and their professional wrestling legacy, let alone their other legacy that the film gets into that, is one of the most heart-wrenching things I've ever heard in my life. The story focuses on Kevin Von Erich, played by Zac Efron, and his perspective mostly, and you find out why this is later on. But no brother, regardless of screen time, feels underdeveloped. Something that this film does really well is it manages to leave you with such a deep understanding of each one without losing a step in terms of its pacing. Instead of taking any massive detours into each brother's personal life, it mostly portrays who they are in their interactions with one another, the way that each one acts with their insanely controlling father. The chemistry between Zac Efron, Jeremy Allen White, Harris Dickinson, and Stanley Simons is just electric. It sucks you right in. You really get a deep understanding of everyone's inner world and their pain and why things progress the way they do, even though most of our time is spent with Kevin. You can tell that Sean Durkin took care to not only honor these brothers, but make a really compelling piece of art. In terms of which films have not received much award recognition this year, this is one of the most baffling omissions to me. It's really excellent and really worth your time. But luckily, there is a very well-made biopic that's actually getting its flowers both financially and critically this year, and that's number 6 on the list, Oppenheimer. This is another one I've spoken about before, so similarly to Al Pacino, I will be brief.
And my eyes see Oppenheimer.
Outstanding from top to bottom. It really transcends what you would expect from this subject matter. Some of Nolan's best work. Congrats to everybody. Congrats to Ireland.
Imaginable.
Number 5, The Holdovers. The The Holdovers was written by David Hemingston and directed by Alexander Payne, and the premise is a simple one. Mina's teacher at the boarding school gets stuck babysitting the kids that are unable to go home during winter break, and it's just a complete joy. Once in a while, we get one of those "they don't make them like this anymore" movies, which serves as this beautiful reminder that they do in fact occasionally make them like this, and we can happily strive to live another day. And on top of that, we've been issued a new offbeat Christmas classic. How about that? And another all-timer Paul Giamatti performance. This film's honestly a little out of line, lavishing me with this embarrassment of riches, but thank you. And Merry Christmas. The vibe that this film has is so from another time, and it's not just because it's a 1970s period piece. It's very comfortable with taking its time to just create a mood. We're treated to these little sequences where you just have a track playing and we cut around to everybody just kind of going about their business at this boarding school. We have breathing room. We aren't in a rush. We're allowed to kind of settle in a little bit. Very character-driven story, and the cast that brings these characters to life is just perfect. Paul Giamatti plays this grumpy history professor who seems to take pride in how he berates his students, but also doesn't seem fully aware that it's causing people to not like him. It's a very unique take on that type of character. He isn't simply this Scrooge-like person who needs to learn to be nicer by the end of the film. There's this innocence about him that Giamatti gets across so beautifully. The guy really does not get how he comes across. Da'Vine Joy Randolph's performance is just so grounded and down to earth. Her character is very much the rational one of the three. Her scenes with Paul Giamatti where they're just chit-chatting are so good. They have such an effortless chemistry with each other. Absolutely wild debut from Dominic Sessa. Insane that this is his first movie. Much like the grumpy professor character, the angsty teenager has been done a million times, but Sessa manages to breathe new life into it. The perfect balance of comedy and tragedy, and speaking of stuff that's so funny, apparently Alexander Payne got annoyed that people find this film very comforting. Don't know what his problem is. I'm very sorry that you made a lovely, nice movie on accident. And one of the only ones on my list that I can actually recommend to people without them asking what's wrong with me. Number 4, May December. May December was directed by Todd Haynes and written by Sammy Birch and Alex Mechanic. So some of the characters in this are heavily inspired by the ones involved in the Mary Kay Letourneau case from the 1990s. So for those who don't remember, back in the day, it was all over the news that this 34-year-old woman groomed her 12-year-old student, had 2 children with him while he was still underage, and even ended up marrying him after she finished her prison sentence for her crimes against him. So the film takes this concept of a couple like that and seeks to explore the media's fascination with them. So basically a film is being made about this couple, Gracie and Joe, whose story mirrors the real-life story I just mentioned, and the actress playing Gracie comes to stay with them in order to prepare for her role. Todd Haynes and Julianne Moore have a professional partnership that has been producing such beautiful work for about 3 decades now. Moore has done so much of her best work with Haynes, and her performance as Gracie in May December is just another one for the books. Her portrayal of this self-centered predator just makes your skin crawl. Every look, every line delivery is a manipulation of somebody else. It's just vile. And the way that she and Natalie Portman, who plays the actress Elizabeth in this, complement each other's performances so well as they engage in this social sparring match, and it's just riveting. I'm sure this joke has been made already, but they're basically having a fake-off. Natalie's really bringing the heat here too, and at a certain point you don't know which character to hate more. Both of these characters are so infuriatingly despicable. Charles Melton as Joe gives one of the most moving performances of the year. You really get the sense that a big part of this character is still just a little boy. And it's not even that he's playing him in a childlike way, and that's what's so brilliant about it. It's just in the way that he holds himself, his tone of voice, his overall shy demeanor. It's really heartbreaking stuff. I really love what Marcelo Zavros did with the score. It's actually taken from the 1971 film The Go-Between and originally composed by Michel Legrand. It's very intense and gives this film its melodramatic edge that has everyone arguing about whether it's camp or not. I don't find the tone of this film to be as easy to pin down as all that. I found it to be pretty unique in its presentation, so it's up to you to absorb the film how you see fit. It's funny at points, deeply sad and disturbing at others. It's such a thorough and intimate portrayal of self-serving predatory behavior. There's so much to digest after the fact, and you're really given all the tools to be able to do that in a meaningful way. Nobody does melodrama like Todd Haynes, and this is yet another great one from him. Number 3 is the last tie of this list, and it's between Killers of the Flower Moon and The Zone of Interest. Though these two films are quite a pair and have very similar themes, I do not recommend watching them in the same day as a double feature, unless you have very specific plans to become so enraged that you never have contact with anyone again. Then go ahead, I guess. Unbelievably great films, just, I would say, pace yourself, you know? Martin Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon is based on the David Grann true crime novel about the mass murder of the Osage people that took place in Oklahoma in the 1920s. Basically, the Osage became wealthy through the royalties obtained from the oil found on their land, and the murders that took place in that area were a part of a grand conspiracy to steal this wealth from them through means of inheritance. The film focuses on the relationship between Molly and Ernest Burkhart, played by Lily Gladstone and Leonardo DiCaprio. Molly's family members were sadly targeted in this murderous conspiracy, and her husband Ernest was a co-conspirator in it. They could have approached this relationship in a number of different ways, and I think they chose wisely. Highlighting the fact that these two really did love each other makes for a far more complex and deeply disturbing story. And on the surface, that sort of choice could seem like, oh, they're trying to make him more sympathetic, but they absolutely aren't, and in fact, it makes his actions all the more sickening and horrific. The magnitude of Lily Gladstone's performance is really difficult to describe if you haven't seen it. It's understated without losing any of its intensity. Her chemistry with Leonardo DiCaprio is just flawless. She steals every scene they're in together. Even when they do interviews together, it's really funny.
Had to do with his intelligence and how much credit I gave him. And always, I mean, and
Me or Ernest?
hear what you want to hear.
And Leo is great in this too. His performance doesn't seem to get talked about as much as everyone else's, which is weird because he's really good in this. I've never seen him play someone like this. He's not who I would have thought to even cast as this demonic buffoon, but he really nails it. Speaking of actual demons, Robert De Niro might have just executed the most realistic portrayal of a psychopath I've ever seen. De Niro plays William Hale, the puppet master behind these murders, and it's like top 3 De Niro performances for me. Like, I'm not even joking. This kind of goes without saying, but just go ahead and ignore all these stupid complaints about this movie being too long, because honestly, could have been longer. None of that runtime felt wasted to me. The work that this film does to establish context for this time and place in the world, to create a sense of immersion to help you understand how these people live their day-to-day lives, is what sets this film apart from so many others in its genre. Every sequence, every scene, down to just if it's 2 people in a room talking, was so engaging that I did not feel the runtime at all. An absolutely brilliant film, and I cannot tell you how happy it makes me to be able to confidently say this late in his career that this is one of Martin Scorsese's best. Moving on to another sickening piece of history, The Zone of Interest. Jonathan Glazer tends to make a film and then not do it again for like a decade, but when he finally gets around to it, it tends to be in the business of knocking you on your ass. Similarly to Killers of the Flower Moon, The Zone of Interest portrays real historical events and real people, entirely different approach. This film takes place from the perspective of Rudolf Höss and his wife Hedwig as they enjoy their lovely home and garden that is positioned directly next to a concentration camp, of which Rudolf is the commandant. The Zone of Interest paints a really chilling portrait of the cold and almost nonchalant way in which the most evil atrocities you can imagine are committed and accepted. And it does so without showing any of the violence itself, but rather the self-involved way in which these people go about their business while the unspeakable goes on just over the wall, under Rudolph's command. Absolutely inspired casting. The way that Christian Friedel plays Rudolf Höss with this sort of meek politeness was just the perfect approach to this part. You're already in this state of pretty intense anger watching this thing, but it's almost like there's no more infuriating moment in it than when this man opens his mouth. That's a performance. It's like the icing on his stupid little birthday cake that also made me mad. The film is shot by Lucas Saul in this very voyeuristic fly-on-the-wall sort of way, and while using that approach to show the more mundane aspects of someone's life can run the risk of being a bit boring, The Zone of Interest does not have this issue. Deeply engaging from beginning to end. The sound design and score come together to create a sense of terror that just feels like an ice pick in your chest. Without spoiling anything, if this were a top 10 endings of 2023 list, this film would be number 1. No question. I have never had an ending knock the wind out of me quite like that. I sincerely hope Jonathan Glazer does not make me wait another 10 years for him to make a film again. Like Scorsese, the guy's one of my favorites. But with Scorsese, there's that thing of like, as long as he's around, we know we got another one coming just around the corner. Glazer tends to make us wait a little bit longer. He's worth it for sure, just fingers crossed that it's 5 years instead of 10 this time. Number 2, Anatomy of a Fall. Anatomy of a Fall was written and directed by Justine Triet and co-written by Arthur Harari. This film tells the story of a woman fighting to maintain her innocence as she's being investigated in regards to her husband's death. When his body is found directly outside of their home, suspicion quickly falls on her as it is difficult to determine whether he jumped, fell, or was pushed. But let's not bury the lead here. Best performance by a dog in any film, it's not even close. You may think that I'm joking, but if you've seen this, you know that I'm not. Rest of the movie is pretty excellent too. Just wanted to shout out Messi the Border Collie, greatest actor of his generation. Sandra Hüller is just crushing it this year. Her performance in The Zone of Interest is really great, but this is just unbelievable. Even though every aspect of this film is pretty excellent, the whole film kinda hinges on her performance because it isn't simply a did she or didn't she narrative. It's about how an investigation and eventually a trial hinges so much on the personality of the accused, especially when there isn't overwhelming evidence of what happened one way or another. Sandra Hüller's character, who's also called Sandra, is not a particularly likable person. She's very matter-of-fact, doesn't seem to feel a tremendous amount of guilt for certain choices she's made in her life, but at the same time, she isn't cruel. There's nothing really notably sinister about her. She's just hard to read. Hüller plays this so convincingly to where you just don't know what to think. You definitely feel bad for her lawyer because she's really got him walking against the wind here sometimes. Milo Machado Granier as Sandra's son Daniel gives a performance well beyond his years. Really impressive. This is the best dialogue of the year for me. It's not just the big argument scene that everybody's been talking about and sharing online. That whole script is awesome. While this is certainly not a film that holds your hand, it gives you so much to contemplate after the fact. You are very well fed and well equipped to draw your own conclusions. Justine Triet was really on God mode with this one. Almost my favorite of the year. Almost. But then Yorgos Lanthimos decided he was going to make one of my favorite movies of all time. So, let's talk about my number 1 favorite film of the year, Poor Things. I've loved Yorgos Lanthimos since Dogtooth. It's a pivotal film for sickos, so of course I love it. And for me, he really hasn't missed. Poor Things might be his best work though. It's my favorite of his. Feels like it was made in the lab specifically for me. As a longtime Lanthimos enjoyer, I really didn't think he had a film this positive in him. He's always dealt in a level of dark comedy that's just a bit darker than most tend to go. And there's always been just a touch of cynicism present in his work. So I was pretty surprised at the pure distilled bottle of joy that Poor Things was. The premise is so out there, and I'm really surprised that it's gotten the recognition that it has, because usually stuff this weird does not sit well with the general public or the Academy. Okay, mild spoiler warning for like 15 minutes into the movie. The basic premise is that a mad scientist, Godwin Baxter, played by Willem Dafoe, resurrects this woman, played by Emma Stone, by putting her unborn child's brain in her head. He calls her Bella and begins to study her as her brand new brain is developing at breakneck speed. We're just blowing past sci-fi and into surrealist fantasy here. We're resurrecting the dead, we're sewing ducks' heads onto dogs' bodies, Mark Ruffalo's playing someone not nice. It's kind of like in The Lobster, where they're just like, okay, if you don't find a partner by the end of your stay at this hotel, we're gonna turn you into an animal. And you're just like, okay, that's how this universe works, I guess. The story follows Bella as she goes out into the world with fresh eyes, experiencing everything life has to offer without feeling inhibited about the way in which she experiences those things. Bella's such a great character, and Emma Stone plays her brilliantly. She's playing something that does not and could not exist, so her job here was kind of impossible. And also managing to do it all perfectly within that heightened comedic tone that Lanthimos likes to have his actors exist within was just like a magic trick. Brilliant work. I love this character so much. She's endlessly endearing and entertaining, and you just have so much affection for her. Mark Ruffalo's just great in this. He's very much playing against type, and it's absolutely hilarious. He's playing this awful, narcissistic, predatory person who's simultaneously such a moron that every time he's in a scene, it's just the funniest thing on earth. When I say that he is cartoonishly unhinged here, I mean that in the best possible way. Everyone else is great too. Willem Dafoe, I mean, do I even have to say anything? He's perfect, as always. Emma Stone jumping into his arms and calling him God just might be the most relatable moment in the film. Every corner of this film is such a striking work of art, it's so hard to know where to begin. I mean, it even has some of the most creative posters I've seen in a while. The entire feel is very dreamlike. It's meant to take place during Victorian times, but it's like pretend fantasy Victorian times. We have aesthetic elements that are from the late 1800s, and then stuff from other time periods, and then things that just don't exist at all. Gorgeously eclectic. I've never seen another film look quite like this. The score is so beautiful and unlike anything I've ever heard. My absolute favorite of the year. I so badly wish that I could play some of it without getting demonetized because it adds further to this film's off-kilter personality. Hats off to the composer Jerskin Fendrix, and I love that he got his little cameo during the dance scene. That was so cute. Excellent adaptation as well. Very different from the book, but I highly recommend it. Completely different experience, and it's fascinating to see which parts Lanthimos and his writer Tony McNamara chose to adapt and change. It's just a gorgeous, challenging, hilarious masterpiece of a film. There are plenty of films about self-discovery and falling in love with life, but there's something about Poor Things that spoke to me on a very personal level. I know it's corny as hell to say that you feel seen by something, but man, I did. I'm sorry. You know what? Actually, no, I'm not, because being moved by a piece of art is one of the great pleasures of life, after all. Anyway, I gotta wrap this up. I'm late for wandering around with my sunglasses on.